that which you love is that which you read. And we as Americans, if we claim to love the Constitution and the founding documents, we darn well better read them, and we darn well better read them so much that we know them chapter and verse, or we have a very precarious hold on the truth. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Constitution Corner. Really pleased to have Matt Shea, state representative from Washington, join me today to talk about Constitution, right? You swear an oath on the Constitution. All of our federal candidates for office swear on the Constitution. The Supreme Court justices are sworn in on the Constitution. Why does it seem that so many of our politicians, including Republicans very often, don't pay the least bit of attention to the Constitution after they swear the oath?
It's so frustrating. Look, you read what you care about. So if you care about the Constitution, you should read it. And if you just ask people, have you read the federal Constitution? They'll say, yeah. Most people say, yeah, I've kind of perused it. They haven't read it in detail. They need to read it in detail. The second question, which is even more informative, is, have you read your state Constitution? And most people will say, no, I haven't read the state Constitution either. Well, if you're charged with governing and you have taken that oath, you've raised your hand and taken that oath, then you should know what standards you are upholding and what the boundaries are that you are upholding and what the jurisdictions are you're upholding. And the fact of the matter is that's not happening.
What amazes me is how successful the media and the progressives have been in demonizing people who actually believe the Constitution. Just to give you one example is borders, right? It is clearly marked out in the Constitution that one of the few real responsibilities of the federal government is to defend our borders. And yet when Donald Trump or anybody suggests that we have a moral and a legal obligation as elected officials to protect the border, not to open it, to throw the gates open, they look at you like you're crazy. And many Americans actually believe that defending the border is not constitutional.
It's unbelievable. It's in the clear wording of the text. And what I'm seeing, it's very interesting now because I'm also an attorney in private practices. I will have to tell some clients, I know the Constitution says this, and it's very clear what it means, but the fact of the matter is courts aren't upholding it. And in a couple examples of this, religious liberty, absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment. Article 1, Section 10 of the Washington State Constitution. Article 26 says perfect toleration of religious sentiment, and yet we have Christian businesses being assaulted as far as legally on their belief systems. You see this with the right to bear arms. You see the Second Amendment says not infringed. In the Washington State Constitution, it says shall not be impaired. Very, very clear English language on these issues, and yet they're completely being ignored because the progressives want to rewrite the Constitution. That's the key point here. They are absolutely desperate to rewrite the Constitution of the United States and justify further controls on the people.
Yeah, and one of the things you and I both dramatically oppose is the so-called con, right? The idea that the Constitution, the Founding Fathers made a mechanism that we could, if we wanted to, after a lot of effort, get together and talk about the Constitution. But the danger of that is once you open the Constitution to being rewritten, for whatever reason, you know there's going to be a whole bunch of progressives who want to pull it the other way.
You know, there's some people that argue that this is just an issue of maintenance. They were just maintaining the Constitution, updating it. But the fact of the matter is the Founding Fathers went back through history to find the best out of the different governments through history, particularly the Greeks and the Romans, among others, and also Moses. And they looked at that and said, okay, here's the best from all of these different types of government, and we want to implement it here in America. There isn't a lot that needs to be maintained or changed in the wording of the Constitution. What needs to be maintained or changed is in the implementation and the defense and the upholding of the Constitution. And that was the whole point behind the oath. You took an oath, and no matter what level you were serving at, you were supposed to implement the Constitution of the United States of America and uphold it regardless. And this is key, regardless of what anybody else was doing around you. In fact, this issue was settled at the Nuremberg trials. The excuse was Befehl ist Befehl, or an order is an order. And they said, no, that's not true. There is an independent moral standard each person is accountable to uphold.
And the funny thing is not just politicians, right? Judges and justices and Supreme Court justices in particular have an extraordinary duty to uphold the Constitution. It is what their job is based on. And it is absolutely frightening when we consider how much that happens in this country depends on what this or that federal judge has to say. The founders never intended that.
No, they didn't. In fact, they actually foresaw that somebody might try to do this. Thomas Jefferson very famously said that the language at the time and the meaning at the time of the words that were being used needed to be the context in which all future interpretations were governed by. He was very, very, very clear about that, and yet we don't see that today because they know they have to try to change the wording or change the interpretations to implement socialism and Marxism here in America.
It is a really good point. Jefferson was quite wise about that. It's amazing how we now advocate for the living, breathing, thriving Constitution, which is utterly susceptible to our whim. We're just about out of time. I want to round it out by simply saying you said a very important thing, that which you love is that which you read. And we as Americans, if we claim to love the Constitution and the founding documents, we darn well better read them, and we darn well better read them so much that we know them chapter and verse, or we have a very precarious hold on the truth. Matt Shea, State Representative from Washington, thank you so much for your time today. We always love talking to you.
Thanks, Duke. Truth is eternal.